Drought-stricken fields stretch endlessly across the Montana Territory, where two sisters stand at the edge of their failing ranch, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the land their parents left behind. Pride runs deep in the Lawrence family, as deep as the roots of the century-old oak tree in their front yard. But pride won't save their cattle from thirst or keep the bank from their door. In an era when women were expected to marry or lose, everything these sisters chose a different path. They secretly sent for mail-order husbands, not for love, but for survival. Yet beneath the parched earth and desperate choices lies a truth that could shatter everything they're building. What happens when the men they hired for labor start asking questions about the sisters' past? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Lawrence's calloused hands trembled as she opened her mother's worn Bible, its leather cover smooth from years of faithful readings. The morning light filtering through the ranch house's dusty windows caught the gold leaf of its pages, creating a halo effect that reminded her of quieter Sunday mornings when their parents still lived. She ran her finger down the family records page, touching each carefully written name as if drawing strength from the ink itself. Emma's boots scraped against the wooden porch outside, a sound as familiar to Sarah as her own heartbeat. At 28, her younger sister still moved with the restless energy that had characterized her childhood, though these days it was tempered by exhaustion. Sarah quickly closed the Bible, tucking away the bank notice she'd been using as a bookmark. "The North Pasture well is running dry," Emma announced, letting the screen door slam behind her. Her dark hair had escaped its practical braid, and dust coated her face, except for clean tracks beneath her eyes where sweat had cut through. "We'll need to move the cattle again." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. They'd been moving the herd from pasture to pasture all summer, chasing what little water remained in their wells. The drought had stretched on for 18 months now, turning their once prosperous ranch into a daily struggle for survival. Mr. Harrison from the bank came by. "While you were out checking the well," Sarah said quietly, finally meeting her sister's eyes. "He left another notice." Emma's face hardened, a mirror of their father's expression when faced with adversity. "Let me guess. More threats about foreclosure." "They're not threats anymore, Em. They're promises. We have 3 months to make good on the back payments, or we lose everything." The sisters shared a long look, years of unspoken understanding passing between them. This land had been in their family for 3 generations. Their grandfather had built the ranch house with his own hands. Their father had expanded it into one of the most respected cattle operations in the territory, and their mother had filled it with love and laughter. Now it was slipping through their fingers like the dry Montana soil. "We could sell the South Quarter," Emma suggested, though they both knew it wouldn't be enough. "Nobody's buying land in a drought," Sarah replied, standing to put the Bible back in its place of honor on the mantle. Her fingers brushed against their mother's silver-framed photograph, and she quickly pulled her hand away before grief could take hold. "Besides, we'd need that land once the rains return." "If the rains return," Emma corrected, dropping heavily into their father's old leather chair. "Sarah, we have to face facts. 2 women alone can't run this ranch, not in these conditions. The hands all left for better prospects months ago. We're killing ourselves trying to do the work of 10 men. Sarah pressed her lips together, an idea she'd been nurturing for weeks pushing its way to the surface. What if we weren't alone?" Emma's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "No. Whatever you're thinking, no. We're not selling shares in the ranch to some man who'll take over everything our parents built." "Not selling," Sarah said carefully. "Hiring, with a very specific arrangement in mind." She crossed to her father's desk and pulled out a newspaper she'd hidden there days ago, folded to show a particular column of advertisements. Emma took it with suspicious eyes, then let out a sharp laugh of disbelief. "Mail-order husbands. Have you lost your mind?" "Think about it," Sarah pressed. "We need help. Strong backs, willing hands. Men looking for a fresh start out west would Work for room, board, and a small share of profits once we're back on our feet. It's a common enough arrangement. Those men expect wives, not employers, Emma protested. But Sarah could see the considering look in her eyes. So we'll be creative with the wording. Make it clear we're looking for working partners, not romance. Besides, she added with a hint of their old teasing, you're not getting any younger, little sister. Emma threw a cushion at her, but she was smiling now. You're one to talk, old maid. Her expression sobered. But Sarah, if we do this, we can never tell them the truth about any of it. Sarah's hand instinctively went to the high collar of her dress, though the marks hidden beneath had long since faded. No, she agreed softly. Some secrets have to stay buried. But we need help, Em. We need it soon, or everything our parents sacrificed for dies with this drought. The sisters looked out the window at their parched land, watching dust devils dance across fields that should have been green with summer grass. Finally, Emma nodded. Write the advertisement, she said. But be careful with the words. We can't afford any misunderstandings about the work or about us. Sarah squeezed her sister's shoulder, relief and anxiety warring in her chest. They were taking a desperate gamble, but then the Lawrence sisters had survived worse odds. Before, they would survive this too, whatever it took. She only prayed the men who answered their advertisement would never discover exactly what whatever it took had meant in their past. The general store's bell chimed as Sarah pushed open the door, the familiar scent of coffee beans and leather goods wrapping around her like a welcome embrace. Old Mr. Peterson looked up from his ledger, wire-rimmed spectacles sliding down his nose. Miss Sarah. He nodded, voice carefully neutral. In a town this small, everyone knew the Lawrence sisters' situation. The usual supplies? Just paper and ink today, Mr. Peterson. Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes, ignoring the mixture of pity and curiosity she found there. And I'd like to send a telegram. She'd spent 3 nights drafting the advertisement, burning through precious candles as she crossed out and rewrote every line until the words were exactly right. Emma had insisted they send it to newspapers in multiple cities, Chicago, Boston, even New York. Cast a wide net, she'd said, but make the requirements specific enough to weed out drifters and dreamers. Now Sarah smoothed out the final draft on Mr. Peterson's counter, her precise handwriting laying out their carefully crafted deception. 2 hard-working sisters seek capable men for marriage and partnership on established Montana cattle ranch. Must have ranching experience. Strong work ethic essential. Currently facing drought conditions. Immediate assistance needed. Room, board, and future profit share offered to the right candidates. Only serious inquiries from men of good character. References required. Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose as he read it, but he kept his thoughts to himself as he calculated the cost per word. Sarah's fingers tightened around the coins in her pocket, their last spare dollars going toward this desperate gamble. Shall I send it to the Montana Territory News first? He asked, reaching for his telegram forms. No, Sarah said firmly. Eastern papers only. The further from Montana, the better. She could feel the weight of his unasked questions, but that was the beauty of living in a place where pride ran deep. No one would dare ask them directly. Let them assume the Lawrence sisters were finally bowing to convention, seeking husbands before spinsterhood claimed them completely. It was better than them knowing the truth. Back at the ranch, Emma was waiting on the porch, practicing her roping skills on fence posts. The ropes snapped through the air with deadly accuracy. Their father had taught them both well, though such skills were considered unladylike by town standards. It's done, Sarah announced, settling into the worn rocker beside her sister. Now, we wait. Emma coiled her rope with practiced ease. How long do you think before we get responses? A few weeks, maybe more. Sarah pulled out the copy she'd made of the advertisement. I made sure to emphasize the work involved. Any man expecting an easy life as a ranch owner's husband will think twice. And the references requirement was clever, Emma added. Drifters. And criminals won't be able to provide those. They sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the drought-stricken land in deceptively beautiful shades of gold and purple. Finally, Emma spoke the fear they'd both been avoiding. What if they figure it out? About that night, Sarah's hand found her sister's, squeezing tight. The sheriff ruled it self-defense. There's nothing to find. The sheriff knew Pa, Emma reminded. He knew what kind of man Jenkins really was, what he tried to... She trailed off, shuddering. But strangers might not understand. Then they won't find out, Sarah said firmly. The bank records still show Pa's name. The deed is clean, and Jenkins' body is 3 years buried with no one to ask questions about him. We just need to get through this drought, save the ranch. And then... She paused, realizing she hadn't thought beyond survival in a long time. And then we'll have 2 husbands to deal with, Emma finished dryly. Men who might expect actual wives, not just working partners. Sarah managed a small smile. One challenge at a time, sister. Besides, any man who answers an advertisement like ours is probably more interested in land than love. Let's hope so, Emma murmured, but her expression remained troubled. Because if they do fall in love with us, then they'll be even more. Destroyed when they learn the truth, Sarah finished softly. The sisters sat together as darkness crept across their land, each lost in thoughts of what their deception might cost them. But they had no choice. The ranch was all they had left of their family, their heritage, their very identity. They would do whatever it took to save it, even if it meant risking their hearts in the process. As stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Sarah sent up a silent prayer. Lord, send us men strong enough to save our ranch, but not so honorable that they'll hate us when they learn what we've done. The train whistle pierced the dry Montana air, a sound that always made Sarah's heart skip. Today, that skip was accompanied by a flutter of anxiety as she guided their wagon toward the station. Emma sat beside her, straight-backed and silent, her face set in the carefully neutral expression she wore when masking nerves. Remember, Sarah murmured as the train appeared in the distance, we stick to our story. Pa's been gone 2 years. Ma followed soon after. We've managed alone until the drought forced us to seek help. Emma's hand brushed against the pistol hidden in her skirts. And if they're not what their letters claimed, then we thank them kindly and send them back east. Sarah's tone left no doubt about the finality of that decision. Their carefully worded correspondence with James Miller and Thomas Cooper had stretched over 6 weeks, each letter scrutinized for any hint of character flaws or hidden motives. The train's wheels screeched against the rails as it shuddered to a stop, belching steam into the afternoon heat. Sarah watched the passengers disembark, her eyes drawn to 2 men who stood out from the usual crowd of settlers and salesmen. They carried themselves differently, not with the hesitant steps of city folk nor the swagger of cowboys, but with the steady confidence of men used to working the land. This taller one, James Miller, she presumed, paused to help an elderly woman down the train steps before retrieving his bags. His companion, who could only be Thomas Cooper, scanned the platform with keen eyes that suggested he missed little. Both men were sun-weathered and solid, their clothes practical but well-maintained. Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized. Oh, she'd been holding. At least they looked the part. Miss Lawrence? James approached their wagon, his voice carrying a slight Boston accent that his letters hadn't revealed. Up close, Sarah could see the intelligence in his grey eyes and the smile lines around his mouth that suggested he laughed easily, or used to. Mr. Miller, she nodded, forcing her voice to remain steady. And Mr. Cooper, welcome to Montana territory. Thomas Cooper tipped his hat, revealing prematurely silver-streaked dark hair. Ma'am? Miss Emma! His voice was deeper with a hint of Pennsylvania in its cadence. Your letters didn't do justice to the vastness of this country. Emma's posture relaxed slightly at his professional tone. Wait until you see the ranch. There's a vastness enough there to make a man question his choices. We've questioned our choices plenty already, James said, helping Thomas load their trunks into the wagon. But good land is worth fighting for. Drought or no drought? Sarah studied him as he spoke, noting the strength in his hands and the way he moved with deliberate efficiency. His references had painted him as a former farm owner who'd lost his land in a bank dispute, a man who understood both agriculture and adversity. You understand this is a working partnership? We're not offering a free ride, Thomas finished, swinging up into the wagon with practiced ease. No, ma'am, your letters made that clear enough. We're here to work, nothing more. But there was something in the way his gaze lingered on Emma that made Sarah's protective instincts flare. She clicked her tongue at the horses, turning them toward home as James settled in beside Thomas. The drought's been hard, she said, keeping her eyes on the road. Harder than we could explain in letters, if either of you wants to back out after. Seeing the situation, we're not the backing out kind, James interrupted quietly. Besides, dry spells end, good land endures. Our concern is whether you ladies are truly prepared to share control of your operation with strangers. Emma stiffened beside Sarah, but her voice remained calm. We're prepared to work alongside men who prove their worth, Mr. Miller. The ranch remains in the Lawrence name. As agreed, Thomas nodded. Though I admit we're curious about your father's opinion on this arrangement. Sarah's hands tightened on the reins. Our father is dead, Mr. Cooper, as we wrote. But he taught us everything he knew about ranching before he passed. We're not helpless women playing at being ranchers. No, James said softly, and something in his tone made Sarah glance back at him. No, I don't imagine you are. But everyone needs help sometimes, even strong women. The wagon fell silent as they rolled through the golden afternoon, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself studying James in the corner of her eye, noting the way he watched the landscape with genuine interest, already assessing soil conditions and grazing potential. Beside him, Thomas was pointing out weather signs to Emma, who seemed surprised by his knowledge of cloud formations. They were competent men, Sarah decided, possibly even good men, and that made them more dangerous than any drifter or fortune hunter could ever be. Good men would want to understand them, to build trust, to forge real partnerships. Good men would ask questions, and questions were the one thing the Lawrence sisters couldn't afford to answer. Dawn painted the ranch in shades of promise that the harsh noon sun would later burn away. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching James Miller check the north pasture fence line. 5 days had passed since the men's arrival, and already the ranch felt different, more alive perhaps, or simply less desperate. She opened their mother's old ledger, adding columns for the new expenses while trying to ignore how thin their margins had become. The sound of boots on the porch made her close the book quickly, but not before James had glimpsed it through the window. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, removing his hat. Dust and early morning work had darkened his tanned skin, but his grey eyes remained sharp. "Could use some water if you're willing." Sarah nodded, pouring him a cup from the pump. "The fence line? Better than I expected. Worse than it should be. Previous repairs were done in a hurry, not your father's work, I'd guess." She turned away, busying herself with the stove. "We did what we could after he passed." "That's what puzzles me," James said carefully, and Sarah felt her shoulders tense. "These repairs, they're at least 4 years old by my estimate, but you said your father died 2 years ago." Before Sarah could respond, Emma's voice rang out from the yard, sharp with warning. "Thomas Cooper! Don't you dare!" They rushed to the window. Thomas had Emma's rope in his hands, demonstrating a complicated trick throw. Emma stood nearby, clearly torn between admiration and annoyance at his assumption she needed teaching. "Your sister handles a rope better than most men I know," James observed. "Your father taught you both well." "Pa believed in practical education," Sarah replied, grateful for the distraction. "Are you and Mr. Cooper finding the sleeping arrangements in the bunkhouse comfortable?" James allowed the subject change, but Sarah caught the thoughtful look in his eyes. "Comfortable enough, though Thomas swears something's been visiting the roof at night. Says he hears footsteps." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she put down her coffee cup. The old storage space above the bunkhouse. They should have cleared it out before the men arrived. Probably raccoons, she said lightly. They've been a nuisance lately. Outside, Emma had reclaimed her rope and was demonstrating her own trick. Throw, one their father had taught them for bringing down larger cattle. Thomas watched with undisguised admiration, though Sarah noticed his eyes spent more time on Emma's face than her technique. "She's not what I expected," James said quietly. "Neither of you are." "Oh, and what did you expect, Mr. Miller?" "Women desperate enough to advertise for husbands usually fall into two categories. Either they're helpless and looking for salvation, or they're clever and looking for someone to exploit." He met her eyes directly. "You and your sister are neither. You're capable, hard-working, and clearly devoted to this land, which makes me wonder why you really answered our letters instead of the dozen others you must have received." Sarah felt the familiar weight of their secrets pressing down. "We told you in our letters, we need help to save the ranch. Nothing more, nothing less. And yet you chose two men who'd lost their own land rather than successful farmers looking for expansion." James stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Men with nothing left to lose. Men who might understand doing whatever it takes to protect what's theirs." The morning sun caught his face, highlighting a thin scar along his jaw that Sarah hadn't noticed before. His own secrets, perhaps. She forced herself to hold his gaze. "Are you saying we chose poorly, Mr. Miller?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, Miss Lawrence, I'm saying you chose very carefully indeed. I just haven't figured out why yet." The sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Through the ID window, Sarah spotted Bert Harrison from the bank riding up with his deputy brother in tow. Her heart clenched. They weren't due to check on the loan for another week. "Problem?" James asked, noting her expression. Sarah straightened her spine, smoothing her skirts with suddenly cold hands. "Not at all. Just our monthly banking discussion. If you'll excuse me." She stepped onto the porch, forcing a calm she didn't feel. Behind her, she heard James call out to Thomas, gathering him for work in the far pasture, giving the sisters privacy for their business, she realized. A gentleman's gesture, but one that made her even more uneasy. James Miller noticed too. Much understood too well, and they still had 11 weeks left before the bank's deadline. The broken fence post lay between them like a challenge. Sarah watched as James examined the splintered wood, his fingers tracing the grain with the same careful attention he seemed to give everything on the ranch. "Lightning strike?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No," Sarah admitted. "That post has a history. Pa always meant to replace it, but—" She trailed off, remembering how many things had been left undone in those final chaotic months. James nodded, understanding in his silence. He'd been doing that more lately, listening to what she didn't say as much as what she did. "Well, then," he straightened up, "might be fitting to make this our first real improvement to the place." They worked together through the morning. Heat, Sarah holding the new post steady while James packed the earth around it. The physical labor was familiar, but the companionship was new. She found herself studying his hands as he worked, noting how they moved with both strength and precision, much like the man himself. "Your father teach you this too?" he asked as they tamped down the last of the soil. "Some things you learn by necessity," she replied, then caught his slight smile. "What?" "Just noticing how you avoid direct answers about your father. It's quite skillful, actually." Sarah's heart stuttered, but before she could respond, Emma's laugh rang out across the pasture. She and Thomas were working on the irrigation ditch, though from the look of things, more talking than digging was happening. "They seem to be getting along well," James observed, following her gaze. Sarah frowned. Too well. This was supposed to be a business arrangement. Life has a way of complicating business. James picked up his tools, his voice carefully neutral. "Speaking of which, I've been going over some ideas for improving the water situation. That old windmill by the north pasture, with some modifications, we might be able to tap into the deeper water table." The suggestion was practical, sensible even, But Sarah heard the underlying message. He was thinking long-term, making plans, beyond their initial agreement. That would be an expensive modification. I've got some savings, he said quietly. Not much, but enough to make a difference if combined with what's left of your cattle money. Sarah stiffened. They hadn't told him about selling off part of the herd. What makes you think the brand numbers don't match your ledger? He held up a hand as she started to protest. Before you worry, I wasn't snooping. Thomas and I needed to know what we were working with, so we did a proper count. You're down 30 head from what's recorded. Times have been hard, she said, hating the defensive note in her voice. Yes, they have. His grey eyes held hers, but they'd be less hard if you trusted us enough to be honest about the situation. All of it. A sudden gust of wind caught Sarah's hair, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain. She looked up, hope warring with experience. Clouds are building. James accepted the subject change with his usual grace. Maybe this time they'll do more than tease. He gathered their tools, then paused. You know, trust works both ways, Miss Lawrence. Whatever you and your sister are protecting, whatever drove you to bring strangers onto your land, it doesn't have to be faced alone. Sarah watched him walk away, his words echoing in her mind. In the distance, Emma had mud on her cheek, and Thomas was looking at her sister like she'd hung the moon. They were all getting too comfortable, too close. This wasn't supposed to happen. The first fat raindrop hit her face, startling her from her thoughts. Within moments, a gentle shower was falling, the parched earth drinking it in greedily. Emma's delighted whoop carried across the pasture, and Sarah saw Thomas grab her hand, spinning her in an impromptu celebration. Even James had stopped walking, his face turned up to the rain, with an expression of pure joy that transformed his usual reserve. He caught her watching and smiled, not his usual careful smile, but something real and warming. Second chances come in strange ways, Miss Lawrence, he called out over the sound of the rain. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to take them. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, feeling the rain soak through her dress, watching their careful plans dissolve like sugar in water. They'd wanted workers, partners in name only. Instead, they'd found men who noticed too much, felt too deeply, and made her wonder if some secrets were worth the weight of carrying them. The rain fell harder, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, nature's own warning that storms, once started, couldn't be controlled. Thomas Cooper wasn't looking for secrets when he climbed into the bunkhouse loft to investigate the nighttime sounds. He'd simply grown tired of lying awake, listening to whatever walked the boards above his head. But as he pushed aside old trunks and dust-covered furniture, his lantern light caught something that made him pause. A woman's locket, half buried in decades of debris. It was a pretty thing, silver with delicate engraving, hanging from a broken chain. When he worked the catch open, he found 2 miniature photographs inside. The first showed a younger Sarah and Emma Lawrence, perhaps 5 years ago, but it was the second photo that held his attention. A newspaper clipping so small he had to squint to read it. "Local man missing," the headline declared. "Ranch hand Jenkins finds something interesting," Thomas startled, nearly dropping the locket. Emma stood in the loft entrance, her face shadowed by the lantern light. He hadn't even heard her climb the ladder. "Just exploring our mysterious midnight visitor," he said carefully, watching her eyes fix on the locket in his hand. "Raccoons, your sister said?" Emma's laugh held no humor. "You should put that back where you found it, Mr. Cooper. Some things are better left buried in dust." But Thomas had spent too many years reading people to miss the fear beneath her bravado. "Like Jenkins?" The temperature in the loft seemed to drop 10 degrees. Emma's hand went to her skirt pocket, where, Thomas had noticed, she often carried a small derringer. "You've been in town asking questions." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "People talk, especially about a ranch hand who vanished the same night your father supposedly had his first heart attack." He kept his voice gentle, non-threatening. The timing seems noteworthy. Timing is a funny thing, Emma said softly. Like how you and James appeared just when we needed help most. Very convenient. We answered your advertisement honestly. Did you? A Boston banker's son who lost everything in a dispute with his father's bank. A Pennsylvania horse breeder who just happened to walk away from a thriving business? Her smile was sharp as a blade. We're not the only ones with secrets, Mr. Cooper. Thomas felt an unwilling spark of admiration. They'd done their own investigating, it seemed. The difference is, our secrets don't involve missing men. No? Emma stepped closer, moonlight from the loft window casting her face in silver and shadow. Tell me, what happened to the man who really owned that horse farm of yours, the one who died so conveniently, leaving you to pick up the pieces? Thomas's breath caught. No one knew about that. Not even James. How did you... We all have graves we'd rather leave undisturbed, Emma said. The question is, can we trust each other to keep our respective secrets? The loft creaked beneath them, decades of prairie winds having worked the joints loose. Down, below, they could hear James and Sarah talking as they returned from evening fence checks. Their voices were relaxed, almost intimate, the tone of people growing dangerously comfortable with each other. I care for you, Thomas said abruptly, surprising them both with his honesty. More than I should, given our arrangement. Whatever. Happened with Jenkins. Don't, Emma's voice cracked. Please, caring only makes everything harder. She held out her hand for the locket. Some mysteries should stay mysterious, Mr. Cooper. For everyone's sake. Thomas looked down at the silver locket, feeling its weight in more ways than one. Finally, he placed it in her palm but caught her hand before she could withdraw. The man who owned the horse farm was cruel to his animals and crueler to his workers. When he died, I made sure his horses found better homes, and his workers got their back pay. Sometimes justice wears a different face than the law expects. Emma's fingers trembled in his grasp. And sometimes, she whispered, the only choice is between terrible options. Their eyes met in the lantern light, understanding passing between them like a current. Slowly, deliberately, Emma pulled her hand away, tucking the locket into her pocket. Good night, Mr. Cooper. I trust we won't have any more problems with night visitors in the loft? He nodded, watching her descend the ladder with the same grace she showed on horseback. Only when her footsteps had faded did he slump against a roof beam, his heart heavy with the weight of unasked questions. Below, he could still hear James and Sarah talking. His friend's laugh drifted up through the floorboards, followed by Sarah's softer response. They were all walking a dangerous line, he realized, between truth and lies, between past and future, between duty and desire. And sooner or later, something would have to break. The disputed water rights map lay spread across the kitchen table, its edges curling in the afternoon heat. Sarah traced the blue line of Carson Creek with one finger, too aware of James standing behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Carson's cutting us off completely, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Claims the drought gives him the right to dam the creek before it reaches our property. He can't do that, James replied, leaning closer to study the property lines. His breath stirred the loose strands of hair at her neck. These water rights were established when the territory was settled. Try telling Carson that. Sarah shifted, attempting to put space between them without being obvious. These moments were happening more often lately, times when James felt less like a business partner and more like something far more dangerous to her peace of mind. We could challenge it legally, he suggested, either oblivious to her discomfort or choosing to ignore it. With what money? Sarah turned to face him and immediately regretted it. They were too close now, his grey eyes intent on her face. Besides, by the time the court settled it, we'd have lost half the herd to thirst. A bead of sweat traced down her neck, and she saw James track its progress before quickly looking away. The heat was making everyone reckless. Just yesterday, she'd caught Emma and Thomas holding hands behind the barn, their heads bent close in conversation. There's another option, James said finally. Carson's always wanted the north pasture. We could trade. No. Sarah's voice was firm. We're not selling any part of this ranch, not 1 acre, even to save the rest. You don't understand? Then help me understand, Sarah. The use of her given name sent a shiver through her despite the heat. Because sometimes saving something means letting a piece of it go. She stepped back, putting the table between them. Like you let your father's bank take your land? The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she'd gone too far. James's face went still, that careful mask of his sliding back into place. You've been investigating me. Can you blame us? But guilt gnawed at her. They demanded complete honesty from their potential husbands, while offering none in return. Before James could respond, the kitchen door banged open. Emma burst in, her face flushed with more than just heat. Carson's men are at the creek. They're building a dam. Sarah grabbed her hat. Get Thomas, we'll... Already there, Emma interrupted. He rode out as soon as we spotted them. Said he'd tried talking first, but Thomas Cooper didn't have the most diplomatic reputation. They all knew. Sarah caught the worry in her sister's eyes, the same worry she suspected that showed in her own when James stepped toward the door. I'll go, he said, already reaching for his gun belt. You ladies stay here. Like hell we will, Emma snapped, then blushed at her own language. It's our water rights they're stealing, and our men they're facing, Sarah added without thinking. 3 heads turned to stare at her, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. Our workers, I mean. A ghost of a smile touched James's lips. Of course. Well then, Miss Lawrence, shall we go defend what's ours, whatever that might be? The ride to Carson Creek was tense, dust coating their throats as they pushed the horses hard. Sarah found herself watching James's straight back ahead of her, remembering the warmth of him in her kitchen. Beside her, Emma rode with the same intensity she brought to everything, but her eyes kept straying to the horizon where Thomas had disappeared. They heard the confrontation before they saw it. Thomas's deep voice carried across the dry grass, followed by the sharper tones of Carson's foreman. As they crested the last rise, Sarah's heart stuttered. Thomas stood, outnumbered, 4 men facing him with hands hovering near gun belts. But it was the look on his face that scared her, the same look Emma got when someone threatened what she loved. James spurred his horse forward, dust rising in his wake. Sarah watched him ride into danger for her ranch, her water, her future, and felt something inside her crack like sun-baked earth finally accepting rain. They were all in too deep now. The careful walls between business and pleasure, between partnership and passion, were crumbling like the dry creek banks beneath their feet, and Sarah wasn't sure anymore if she wanted to rebuild them. In the distance, thunder rolled across the prairie. A storm was coming one way or another. The only question was, what would be left standing when it passed? The torn bank letter trembled in Sarah's hands as she read it for the 3rd time, hoping somehow the words would change. They didn't. Behind her, the grandfather clock ticked away precious seconds, its rhythm matching her racing heart. Sarah. Emma's voice from the doorway was tight with worry. Thomas just rode in from town. Harrison's been talking to people about Jenkins. The letter crumpled in Sarah's grip. Which Harrison? The deputy. Emma crossed the room, her skirts rustling, like dry leaves. He's been asking about the night, Pa. About that night. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering flames and screams and choices that couldn't be unmade. Why now? After all this time? Because of them. Emma nodded toward the window where James and Thomas were visible, repairing the barn roof in the late afternoon sun. 2 strangers show up asking their own questions. It was bound to stir things up. Before Sarah could respond, bootsteps sounded on the porch. James appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. Ladies, we need to talk. Emma's hand slipped into her pocket. Where her derringer waited, Sarah knew. But James's next words, stop them both cold. The bank's calling in all their loans early. Not just yours, every ranch that borders Carson's property. Sarah's mind raced. He can't have that kind of influence. He does when he's quietly buying up the bank's controlling shares. James stepped into the room, his usual careful distance, forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Carson's planning something bigger than a water rights dispute. He wants the whole valley. How do you know this? Emma demanded. A muscle ticked in James's jaw. Because it's exactly what my father's bank did back east. Buy up distressed loans, pressure people to sell, consolidate the land for wealthy investors. His eyes met Sarah's. I didn't just lose my land in a dispute. I tried to stop him, warn people. He disowned me for it. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Sarah found herself stepping toward him without conscious thought. Why are you telling us this now? Because you have 2 weeks, not 3 months. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. And because I'm tired of dancing around the truth. All of it. James, Sarah started. But he pressed on. Jenkins didn't just disappear, did he? Whatever happened that night, the night your father supposedly had his heart attack, it's connected to why you really brought us here. Emma made a small sound, like pain swallowed back. Outside, they could hear Thomas climbing down from the roof, his boots heavy on the ladder. You don't understand, Sarah whispered. Then help us understand. James closed the distance between them, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. Whatever it is, Sarah, we can face it together. But these secrets, they're eating you alive, both of you. And if the truth destroys everything? Emma's voice cracked. If it makes you see us differently. I already see you, James said softly, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. I see a woman who would do anything to protect her sister and her land. I see someone who carries guilt for choices I suspect she had no choice in making. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. You can't know that, can't I? The night terrors Emma tries to hide, the way you both flinch when someone mentions Jenkins or your father in the same breath, the burns on that hidden section of barn wall. His voice gentled. We're not blind, Sarah, and we're not afraid. Of hard truths, Thomas's boots sounded on the porch steps, and Emma stiffened. But Sarah barely heard him enter, too caught in the intensity of James's gaze. The understanding she saw there, he knew, maybe not the details, but enough. And he was still here, still looking at her, like she was something precious rather than stained. 2 weeks, she said finally, her voice hardly more than a whisper. If we're going to risk everything on the truth, we need a plan first. James nodded slowly. Carson won't wait. If we're going to save the ranch isn't all we need to save, Emma interrupted. She had moved to stand beside Thomas, their shoulders touching. Is it, sister? Sarah looked at the crumpled bank letter in her hand, then at the three. People who had somehow become essential to her world. Trust, her father used to say, was like a match. Strike it at the wrong time and everything burns. But sometimes she was beginning to realize you had to risk the fire to forge something stronger. The torn bank letter trembled in Sarah's hands as she read it for the 3rd time, hoping somehow the words would change. They didn't. Behind her, the grandfather clock ticked away precious seconds, its rhythm matching her racing heart. Sarah. Emma's voice from the doorway was tight with worry. Thomas just rode in from town. Harrison's been talking to people about Jenkins. The letter crumpled in Sarah's grip. Which Harrison? The deputy. Emma crossed the room, her skirts rustling. Like dry leaves, he's been asking about the night part, about that night. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering flames and screams and choices that couldn't be unmade. Why now? After all this time, because of them. Emma nodded toward the window where James and Thomas were visible, repairing the barn roof in the late afternoon sun. 2 strangers show up asking their own questions. It was bound to stir things up. Before Sarah could respond, boot steps sounded on the porch. James appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. Ladies, we need to talk. Emma's hand slipped into her pocket. Where her derringer waited, Sarah knew. But James's next words stopped them both cold. The bank's calling in all their loans early. Not just yours, every ranch that borders Carson's property. Sarah's mind raced. He can't have that kind of influence. He does when he's quietly buying up the bank's controlling shares. James stepped into the room, his usual careful distance, forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Carson's planning something bigger than a water rights dispute. He wants the whole valley. How do you know this? Emma demanded. A muscle ticked in James's jaw. Because it's exactly what my father's bank did back east. Buy up distressed loans, pressure people to sell, consolidate the land for wealthy investors. His eyes met Sarah's. I didn't just lose my land in a dispute. I tried to stop him, warn people. He disowned me for it. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Sarah found herself stepping toward him without conscious thought. Why are you telling us this now? Because you have 2 weeks, not 3 months. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. And because I'm tired of dancing around the truth. All of it. James? Sarah started. But he pressed on. Jenkins didn't just disappear, did he? Whatever happened that night, the night your father supposedly had his heart attack, it's connected to why you really brought us here. Emma made a small sound, like pain swallowed back. Outside they could hear Thomas climbing down from the roof, his boots heavy on the ladder. You don't understand, Sarah whispered. Then help us understand. James closed the distance between them, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. Whatever it is, Sarah, we can face it together. But these secrets, they're eating you alive, both of you. And if the truth destroys everything? Emma's voice cracked. If it makes you see us differently? I already see you, James said softly, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. I see a woman who would do anything to protect her sister and her land. I see someone who carries guilt for choices I suspect she had no choice in making. Sarah felt, tears burning behind her eyes. You can't know that, can't I? The night terrors Emma tries to hide, the way you both flinch when someone mentions Jenkins or your father in the same breath. The burns on that hidden section of barn wall. His voice gentled. We're not blind, Sarah, and we're not afraid of hard truths. Thomas's boots sounded on the porch steps, and Emma stiffened. But Sarah barely heard him enter, too caught in the intensity of James's gaze, the understanding she saw there. He knew, maybe not the details, but enough. And he was still here, still looking at her like she was something precious rather than stained. 2 weeks, she said finally, her voice hardly more than a whisper. If we're going to risk everything on the truth, we need a plan first. James nodded slowly. Carson won't wait. If we're going to save the ranch isn't all we need to save, Emma interrupted. She had moved to stand beside Thomas, their shoulders touching. Is it, sister? Sarah looked at the crumpled bank letter in her hand, then at the 3 people who had somehow become essential to her world. Trust, her father used to say, was like a match. Strike it at the wrong time and everything burns. But sometimes she was beginning to realize you had to risk the fire to forge something stronger. The lightning-struck tree crashed across the road just as the first real storm in 18 months broke over the ranch. Sarah stood in the downpour, watching James and Thomas struggle with the fallen oak that had blocked their escape to town. The bank meeting they'd planned to attend, their last chance to challenge Carson's loan recalls, would have to wait. We need to get inside, Emma shouted over the wind. The creek's rising. Sarah turned to see water rushing down Carson. Creek's dry bed. 18 months of drought ending in minutes of fury. The dam Carson's men had built wouldn't hold against this deluge, and neither would the root cellar where their darkest secret lay buried. The cellar. She grabbed James's arm as he passed. If it floods, understanding flashed in his eyes. Thomas, he called, get Emma to the house. Sarah and I will check the outbuildings. They ran through the storm, rain stinging their faces. Sarah's skirts were soaked, pulling at her legs as they splashed through growing puddles. Above them, lightning split the sky, illuminating the barn in harsh flashes that reminded her too, much of that other night. James caught her as she stumbled. We don't have to do this, he said close to her ear. Let the flood take the evidence. Let it all wash away. She shook her head, rain dripping from her hair. And what happens when Carson's men find what's left? We have to... She broke off, as another lightning bolt revealed a figure running toward the cellar. "Emma!" Her sister was already pulling at the cellar doors, Thomas close behind her. "We can't leave him here," Emma cried as they reached her. "Not like this, not any more." Together they heaved the heavy doors open. The smell of wet earth rose from the darkness, along with memories Sarah had tried for years to bury. James produced a storm lantern from somewhere, its light revealing the cellar's contents. Preserved food, root vegetables, and in the far corner, the collapsed section that hadn't collapsed naturally. "The floodwater's coming," Thomas warned, checking the creek's progress. "Whatever we're doing, it needs to be now." Sarah met Emma's eyes, seeing her own fear and determination reflected there. "We dig," she said simply. They worked in desperate silence, using old tools they'd never quite been able to throw away. The earth was softer now, sodden with rain, but it still fought them. Sarah's hands bled, and she saw James wince as his palms tore on the shovel's rough wood. "Wait," Thomas said suddenly. "I hit something." The storm lantern's light caught dull metal, Jenkins's belt buckle. Sarah heard Emma's sharp intake of breath, felt James move closer to her side. 3 years of nightmares reduced to bones. "And rusted metal. We need to move him," Emma whispered. "Somewhere no one will ever look." "The old mine shaft," Thomas suggested. "The one in Carson's territory. Let him keep the secret he paid for." Lightning flashed again, and Sarah saw James watching her with an intensity that made her shiver despite the warm rain. "It's your choice," he said softly. "Both of you. We'll stand by whatever you decide." Emma's hand found Thomas's in the darkness. "We trust you," she said, and Sarah heard the double meaning in her words. "With everything." They worked quickly then, transferring Jenkins's remains to an old tarp. The creek water was already seeping into the cellar as they finished. Nature trying to expose what they'd hidden. But nature, Sarah thought, hadn't counted on the strength of 4 people, bound by something stronger than secrets. Later, after they'd done what needed doing, they stood in the barn's shelter watching the storm rage. Emma and Thomas had gone too. They'd check on the horses, leaving Sarah alone with James for the first time since the truth had come out. "You're shivering," he observed, shrugging out of his wet coat to wrap it around her shoulders. "James." She turned to face him, needing to know. "Why did you stay? After learning what we did, what we hid, why are you still here?" His hand came up to brush wet hair from her face, the gesture achingly tender. "Because some sins aren't sins at all. Because protecting the people you love is never wrong." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "Because I find myself loving a woman strong enough to carry the weight of terrible choices and gentle enough to still be haunted by them." The storm's fury matched the pounding of Sarah's heart as she stepped into his embrace. His arms came around her, solid and sure, offering shelter from more than just the rain. "We could lose everything," she whispered against his chest. "Or we could gain everything," he countered, tilting her face up to his. "Some storms destroy, others clear the air for new growth." When he kissed her, Sarah tasted rain and promise and possibility. Outside, the drought-stricken earth drank deep, while inside the barn, 2 hearts finally allowed themselves to do the same. Sarah found her father's old revolver in the study drawer, its barrel still oiled despite 3 years of disuse. The weight of it brought back memories of his lessons. "A gun's not for threatening, Sarah girl. It's for when you've run out of choices. You don't have to do this." James stood in the doorway, his shadow stretching across the study floor in the early morning light. "Let me talk to Carson alone." "No." Sarah checked the chambers with practiced hands. "We face him together. All of us." The storm had passed, leaving behind mud-slick roads and whispers in town. Deputy Harrison had been asking questions again, this time about James's past. about the real reason his father's bank had failed, about Thomas Cooper's convenient inheritance of a horse farm whose owner died under mysterious circumstances. "They're trying to divide us," Emma had said last night after Thomas brought news of the rumors. "Make us doubt each other." But Carson's scheme had backfired. Instead of sowing doubt, his investigations had only revealed how similar their stories were. Good people forced into desperate choices, carrying burdens of necessary sins. A horse's whinny broke the morning quiet. Thomas's voice carried from the yard, sharp with warning. Sarah moved to the window, James close behind her. Carson's men, both 6 of them armed, sat their horses in the ranch yard, and at their head, Harrison, Sarah breathed. The deputy's badge caught the sun like an accusation. "Sarah Lawrence," Harrison called out, "we have some questions about James Miller's real identity, and about that night 3 years ago." Emma appeared on the porch, Thomas a protective shadow. Behind her, Sarah saw her sister's hand drift to her skirt pocket, to her derringer, always close now. "This is private property." Emma's voice rang out clear and strong. "You're not welcome here." Private property bought with blood money, some might say. Harrison swung down from his horse. "We know what happened to Jenkins, just like we know what really happened to James Miller's father's bank, and to the owner of Cooper's horse farm." Sarah felt James stiffen beside her. "He's bluffing," she whispered. "He can't know." "Oh, but I do." Harrison's smile was cold as mountain winter. "Carson's been busy, ladies. Money talks, and there are always people willing to sell old secrets. The only question is, who pays the price for keeping them?" "That's close enough." Thomas's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd faced worse threats. He'd moved to stand between Harrison and Emma, his hand near his gun. "Think carefully, Deputy," James added, stepping onto the porch with Sarah. "About whose secrets you're really protecting, about who Carson truly is." Harrison's smile faltered slightly. "Carson's offering a deal. Sign over the water rights, admit what happened to Jenkins was self-defense, and this all goes away. Fight him and everything comes out. About all of you." Sarah felt the weight of her father's gun, the weight of choices and consequences. She looked at James, saw the same resolution in his eyes that she felt in her heart. Emma and Thomas stood shoulder to shoulder, their silence speaking volumes. "You can tell Carson," Sarah said clearly, "that the Lawrence sisters don't take kindly to threats, not 3 years ago, and not now." "You're making a mistake," Harrison warned. "I have warrants. Based on what evidence?" James's voice was deadly quiet. "The word of a man who sent Jenkins to strong-arm women, who's using the bank to steal people's land. Those are dangerous accusations to make, Deputy, the kind that might interest federal investigators." Sarah saw uncertainty flicker in Harrison's eyes. The deputy's hand strayed toward his gun, but Thomas's weapon appeared as if by magic, aimed steady and sure. "Sometimes," Thomas said softly, "a man has to choose between what's legal and what's right. Choose carefully, Deputy." Tension crackled like heat lightning. Sarah held her breath, feeling James's solid presence beside her, seeing Emma's unwavering stance. They were 4 people bound by love, trust, and shared sins, standing together against a world that would judge them without understanding. Finally, Harrison stepped back. "This isn't over." "No," Sarah agreed. "But when it is, Carson might find himself answering for more than just Jenkins." They watched the riders leave, dust rising behind them like the last traces of doubt falling away. When the yard was empty, Sarah felt James's hand find hers, squeezing gently. "They'll be back," Emma said quietly. Thomas nodded, holstering his weapon. "With more men, more accusations." "Let them come," James replied. "Some things are worth fighting for." Sarah looked at their joined hands, at her sister's quiet strength, at the love and trust shining in Thomas's eyes when he looked at Emma. "Yes," she said softly, "they are." The morning sun caught her father's gun as she set it aside, choosing instead to lean into James's embrace. They had drawn their lines in Montana soil, not just between right and wrong, but between love and fear, between past and future, and this time they would hold that line together. Emma found the hastily written note in her sister's familiar handwriting, tucked between the pages of their mother's recipe book. Meet at midnight. Old Creek Bend. Her fingers traced the words, remembering how many family secrets these worn pages held. Tonight, they would add one more. The Creek Bend had been their childhood hiding place, where two young girls would escape their father's watchful eye to dream of adventures. Now, in the silver wash of moonlight, it became a war room of sorts. Sarah and James were already there when Emma arrived with Thomas, a lantern casting their shadows long against the creek bank. "Carson's not just buying up loans," James said without preamble, spreading papers on a flat rock. "He's been gathering evidence on every ranch owner in the valley, looking for pressure points." "Blackmail," Thomas added, his arm steady around Emma's waist. The casual intimacy of his touch still thrilled her, even in these serious moments. But he made a mistake targeting all of us at once. People are starting to talk, compare notes. Sarah nodded, leaning into James's solid presence. "The Hendersons rode out this morning. Said Carson tried the same strong-arm tactics with them 3 years ago. Jenkins wasn't his only enforcer. And Harrison's deputy badge isn't as clean as he'd like people to think," Emma contributed. "I had a long talk with Mrs. Peterson at the general store. Seems our good deputy has been collecting fees from farmers who need bank loans approved." James's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "If we can prove the bank's involvement in Carson's land grabs..." "Federal investigators take a dim view of bank fraud," Thomas finished, "especially when it crosses state lines." Sarah pulled out another paper, a telegram from James's contact in Boston. "Carson's been working with investment groups back east, promising them cheap Montana ranch land for railroad development. Just like your father's bank," Emma said softly, watching James's face tighten at the memory. "History repeating itself," he agreed. "But this time we can stop it, if we can get proof to the right people." "It's dangerous," Sarah warned. "Carson's men are watching the ranch, and Harrison's a coward," Thomas interrupted. "Remove Carson's protection, and he'll fold faster than a cheap suit." Emma felt Thomas's hand tighten on her waist, knew he was remembering their own confrontation with corrupt lawmen back in Pennsylvania. "We'll need help," she said. "People in town who'll stand with us." "Already started on that." James smiled slightly. "Amazing how many people are willing to talk when someone finally stands up to a bully." Sarah stepped away from the rock, moving, to stand at the creek's edge. The recent rains had filled it to bursting, water rushing past with newfound strength. "Pa always said water rights were the real gold in Montana. Who controls the water controls everything." "Your father was a wise man," James said, moving to join her. The way he looked at her sister made Emma's heart ache with happiness. They deserved this, both of them. Love born of understanding and trust. "Carson won't give up easily," Thomas warned. "When backed into a corner, men like that turn vicious." "Let him." Emma surprised herself with her own fierceness. "We're not the same women he tried to intimidate 3 years ago, and we're not alone anymore." Sarah turned from the creek, moonlight silvering her hair. "No, we're not." Her eyes met James's with such tenderness that Emma had to look away. "Which is why we need to be married, all of us, before this fight comes to a head." Silence fell, broken only by the creek's song. Emma felt Thomas go very still beside her. "Sarah," James started, but she held up a hand. "Not for appearances." "Sake," her sister continued, "not for propriety or protection or any of the reasons we first brought you here, but because life's too short and love's too precious to waste time pretending we don't know what we want." Emma found herself moving before she'd consciously decided to, wrapping her arms around her sister. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Sarah's laugh was watery but real. "The only thing I'm sure of is that I don't want to face whatever's coming without James by my side in every way." "Well then," Thomas's voice was rough with emotion, "I suppose we'd better figure out how to save this ranch. I've got plans for that north pasture that don't involve Carson or railroads." "Oh?" Emma turned in his arms, heart dancing. What plans would those be? His kiss was answer enough, sweet and sure and full of promises. Nearby, she heard James murmur something that made Sarah laugh, a sound of pure joy that hadn't graced their ranch in far too long. The moon sailed high above, witnessing their plans and promises. Tomorrow would bring danger and difficult choices, but tonight belonged to love. Love that had grown from necessity into something as deep and true. As the creek's renewed flow beside them, the hidden deed fell from their father's Bible as Sarah reached for it during evening prayers, yellowed paper floating to the floor like autumn leaves. Emma caught her breath, recognizing their father's careful handwriting. James picked it up. Before Sarah could move, his eyes widening as he read. "This is a transfer deed," he said slowly, "for Carson's water rights, dated 3 days before Jenkins died." Sarah's hands trembled as she took the document. "That's impossible. Carson's always owned those rights." "No." Emma moved closer, memory stirring. "Remember how angry Pa was that last week? The meetings in town he wouldn't talk about." Thomas joined them at the study table, lamplight catching the silver in his dark hair. "He bought the rights out from under Carson," he said with quiet admiration. "That's why Carson sent Jenkins. Not just to pressure him to sell the ranch, but to find this deed," James finished. "Without it, Carson could keep claiming the water as his." Sarah sank into her father's old leather chair, document clutched to her chest. "All this time, Pa died protecting more than just us. He died protecting the whole valley. And Carson's been trying to steal it back ever since," Emma added bitterly. "Using the bank, using Harrison, using fear," Thomas said, his hand finding Emma's shoulder. "But fear only works when people feel alone." James nodded, picking up their father's Bible with careful reverence. "The deadline for the loan recall is tomorrow. Carson will expect us to either sell or try to fight it in court. He won't expect this." Sarah smoothed the deed with trembling fingers. "But if we use it, everyone will know about Jenkins," Emma finished softly. "About what we did." Silence fell, heavy with memory and consequence. Outside, nightbirds called across the prairie, reminding them how much had changed since that other night 3 years ago. Sarah felt James move behind her chair, his presence solid and sure as mountain bedrock. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "That night with Jenkins, if you had it to do over, knowing everything that would follow, I'd do it again." The words came without hesitation. Sarah looked up at him, needing him to understand, to protect Emma, to protect our father's legacy. "Some choices you make with your heart, not your conscience." His hand found her shoulder, squeezed gently. "Like choosing to trust strangers with your darkest secrets." "Like choosing to love someone," Emma corrected, moving into Thomas's embrace. "Even knowing they might break your heart when they learn the truth." Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. "Some truths strengthen love rather than break it." Sarah watched her sister's face soften with happiness and felt James's thumb brush tenderly across her neck. They had come so far from that desperate advertisement, from thinking they could keep their hearts walled off while accepting help. "Tomorrow, then," she said, standing, "we take the deed to town, show everyone what Carson's really been fighting to hide. Not just the deed." James pulled out the papers they'd gathered, proof of Carson's corruption spanning 3 states. Everything. No more secrets, no more fear. Harrison won't stand with Carson once the truth's out, Thomas added. "Men like that survive by choosing the winning side." Emma's laugh held an edge of steel. "And Carson's about to learn what Pa always said, you don't get between Montanans and their water rights." Sarah felt tension ease from her shoulders as James's arms slipped around her waist. "I wish Pa could see this," she whispered. "See how his last fight finally ends. He sees." Emma's voice was soft but certain. "He sees that his daughters found good men. Men willing to stand beside them, not in front of them. Men who understand that love and justice sometimes wear unusual faces," Thomas added, making Emma smile. James turned Sarah in his arms, his eyes holding hers, with an intensity that made her heart race. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "know that I'm proud to stand with you, to share your burdens and your battles." "And your triumphs," Thomas added, grinning as Emma kissed him. Sarah looked at the deed that had cost so much, had shaped so many lives. Tomorrow, it would change everything again, but this time they faced the change together, not as business partners or convenient allies, but as family. "For Pa," she said softly, tucking the deed safely away. "For the valley," Emma added. "For justice," Thomas contributed. James's kiss was gentle but fierce with promise. "For love," he whispered against her lips, "all of it in the end. For love." Outside, the night wind carried the scent of rain and renewal. Tomorrow would bring its own storms, but tonight they had truth, trust, and each other, and in Montana. Territory that was more precious than any deed, more powerful than any secret. The morning sun caught Sarah's mother's wedding ring as James slipped it onto her finger, the simple gold band meaning more now than she'd ever imagined it could. Emma's matching ring, worn by their father's mother before her, graced her sister's hand where Thomas had placed it moments earlier. A quiet ceremony in the ranch house parlor wasn't what any of them had planned, but with Carson's deadline hours away, they needed this moment of peace before the storm. "The rings were supposed to wait," Emma whispered, watching Thomas sign the marriage certificate Judge Matthews had brought out from town. "Until after. Some things shouldn't wait," James said quietly, his hand steady as he added his own signature beside Sarah's. "Some promises need to be made while we can still choose the moment." The judge, an old friend of their father's, watched with understanding in his rheumy eyes. He'd brought more than just marriage licenses on this early morning visit. The federal investigator's credentials in his pocket carried the weight of official justice, and the papers detailing Carson's bank fraud would see the light of day whether they succeeded or failed. "They're coming," Thomas called from the window. "Carson's got at least 15 men with him." Sarah felt James's hand tighten on hers, saw Thomas move instinctively closer to Emma. The bonds between them were official now, but they'd been forged long before any papers were signed. "Remember," Judge Matthews said, gathering his documents, "I'm riding for the federal marshal as soon as I leave. Just keep them talking for 2 hours. That's all we need." "Time to face the music," Emma said, checking her derringer one last time before tucking it away. Sarah caught her sister's hand. "Together, always." Emma's smile was fierce with love and determination. They stepped onto the porch, just as Carson's. Men rode into the yard, Harrison's deputy badge gleaming dully among them. Carson himself sat his horse like a man unused to compromise, his face set in lines of smug certainty. "Last chance, ladies," he called out. "Sign over the water rights, admit to Jenkins's death, and this all goes away quiet-like." "Funny thing about water rights," James said, his voice carrying across the yard. "They belong to whoever holds the deed. Isn't that right, Carson?" Sarah saw Carson's face change as she held up their father's hidden deed, saw the flash of fear he quickly masked with anger. "That paper's worthless without proof," he snapped. "And you've got bigger problems. Harrison here has warrants for all of you." "Careful, deputy," Thomas warned as Harrison started to move. "Those warrants might be interesting reading for the federal investigators, especially the part about where you got your evidence." A stir went through Carson's men. Sarah saw uncertainty in their faces as they looked between Carson and the United Front on the porch. These were local men, many of whom had known her father, known Carson too, she wagered. "You really want to know what happened to Jenkins?" Emma's voice rang out clear and strong. "Why don't you tell them, Carson? Tell them how you sent him to. It threatened 2 women, how he tried to—" Her voice caught, but Thomas's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "Tell them about the bank fraud too," James added. "About buying up loans across state lines, using Harrison to pressure people into selling. Just like you did back east until it all fell apart." Carson's face had gone pale with rage. "You think anyone will believe you? 4 murderers trying to save their own skins. They'll believe the proof," Sarah said quietly. "Every document, every secret deal, every crooked loan. All safely in the hands of a federal judge by now. Your empire's built on sand, Carson. And the tide's coming in. A shot cracked out, sending birds scattering from the oak tree, but it wasn't Carson who had fired. It was one of his own men firing into the air before turning his horse. "This ain't what I signed on for, Carson," the man said. Others muttered agreement, reining their horses back. Harrison looked desperately between his departing men and Carson's thunderous face. "Now wait a minute. It's over," James said firmly. "The only question is whether you leave quietly or in federal custody." Sarah watched Carson's face as he realized the truth. He was alone. His carefully built web of threats and secrets had snapped, leaving him exposed in the morning light. "This isn't finished," he snarled, wheeling his horse around. "No," Sarah agreed, feeling James's strong presence beside her, seeing Thomas stand protective and proud next to Emma. "It's just beginning." They watched Carson ride away, Harrison and the last few loyal men trailing behind like storm debris. When the dust settled, Emma turned to Thomas with tears and laughter competing in her voice. "Well, husband," she said, "that was quite a wedding morning." His kiss was answer enough, tender and triumphant all at once. Sarah felt James's arms slip around her waist and leaned back into his embrace, watching the sun rise higher over their land, their home now and always. "Think Pa would have approved," she whispered. James's laugh rumbled against her back, of his daughters finding men who'd stand beside them against any storm. "I'd say he's smiling right now." And somewhere Sarah thought she could feel that smile, warm as morning sun on Montana soil. The bank notice lay unopened on the kitchen table, but this time Sarah felt no fear as she broke the seal. James stood behind her chair, one hand resting warm and steady on her shoulder, while Emma and Thomas sat across from them, their fingers intertwined on the weathered wood. "Well?" Emma's voice held more curiosity than concern. "What's the damage?" Sarah's eyes scanned the formal text, a smile spreading slowly across her face. "The loan's been reinstated. Original terms, original timeline." She looked up at James. "Your testimony about the bank fraud must have been convincing." "The federal investigators didn't need much convincing once they saw the paper trail," James replied, but pride colored his tone. "Carson's creative bookkeeping told its own story." Along with Harrison's confession, Thomas added with grim satisfaction. "Amazing how quickly he turned on his former boss once he realized which way the wind was blowing." Emma snorted softly. "Cowards often do." But her expression softened as she looked around their kitchen, bright with late afternoon sun. "It feels different now, doesn't it? Like we can finally breathe." Sarah knew what her sister meant. The weight of secrets had lifted, replaced by something lighter but just as powerful. Trust, love, shared purpose. Even the ranch itself seemed to respond, the recent rains bringing green back to their pastures. "We'll need to ride out to the north pasture," Thomas said, ever practical despite the contentment in his eyes when he looked at Emma. "Check the new irrigation channels before dark." "Already done," James replied. "Sarah and I checked them this morning. The water's flowing. Exactly as it should." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at Emma's knowing smile. Their inspection of the irrigation channels had involved rather more kissing than actual checking, but she wouldn't apologize for stealing moments of joy. They'd earned them. "The Henderson place needs help with their fencing," Emma mentioned. "Now that Carson's not breathing down everyone's neck, folks are starting to work together again, like the old days." Speaking of the old days, Thomas hesitated, then pushed on. "We found something else in the root cellar while we were cleaning it out. Something you both should see." He produced a tin box, rust-spotted but intact. Sarah recognized it immediately. Their father's old letterbox, thought lost in the chaos after his death. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside lay bundles of letters, carefully tied with faded ribbon. But these weren't business correspondence. They were love letters, decades of them, exchanged between their parents during their fathers. "Frequent trips to negotiate water rights and cattle sales. My dearest heart," Sarah read from the top letter, her voice thick with emotion. "Another week away from you and the girls feels like an eternity. But every deal I make, every right, I secure is for our future, for the legacy we're building together. Emma wiped tears from her cheeks. He knew, didn't he, about Carson's plans for the valley. That's why he bought those water rights. He was protecting more than just our ranch, James said quietly. He was protecting a way of life for everyone. And now we're protecting it too, Thomas added, his arm sliding around Emma's shoulders. Together. A knock at the door interrupted them. Old Mr. Peterson from the general store stood on their porch, hat in hands. "Begging pardon, Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Cooper," he said, using their married names with careful respect. "But there's talk in town about forming a ranchers' association to manage water rights fairly, help each other in hard times. We thought this might be the right place for the first meeting." Sarah felt James's quiet laugh of approval rumble through his chest where he stood behind her. "When?" she asked. "Sunday after church?" "Nothing formal, just neighbors helping." "Neighbors, like your father always said we should." Sarah looked at Emma, saw her own joy reflected in her sister's eyes. "Sunday would be perfect, Mr. Peterson. We'll provide the coffee." After he left, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint their kitchen gold. The letterbox sat open on the table, their father's words a bridge between past and future. "You know what this means," Emma said finally, mischief dancing in her eyes. "We'll have to clean the whole house. And bake," Sarah added with mock horror. "So much baking. Good thing you have help now," James murmured, dropping a kiss on her head. Thomas grinned. "Permanent, reliable help, no advertisement required." They laughed together, the sound echoing through rooms that had known too much silence. Outside, their land stretched green and promising under the Montana sky. The drought had broken in more ways than one, bringing new growth to more than just the soil. Sarah touched her wedding ring, then reached for her husband's hand. Some victories came with a price, yes, but love, trust, and truth, those were worth every penny. The marriage certificates hung side by side in the study, framed in simple wood that James and Thomas had crafted together. Sarah paused to straighten them, smiling at the memory of that hurried morning ceremony that had somehow been perfect in its imperfection. 3 months had passed since then, each day bringing new proof that desperate choices could lead to incredible blessings. "Wool gathering again?" Emma's voice carried from the doorway, tinged with the contentment that seemed to radiate from her lately. "The Ranchers Association members will be here soon." Just thinking about how much has changed. Sarah turned to find her sister practically glowing in the morning light. "Though not as much as is about to change, I'd say. When are you planning to tell Thomas?" Emma's hand drifted to her stomach, still flat, but holding its own precious secret. "Tonight, I wanted to be sure first." Her eyes sparkled. "I don't suppose you'd care to make it a double announcement." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "How did you know?" Sister's intuition. "That, and I saw James riding into town yesterday to fetch the doctor, looking like he was floating on air." Emma crossed the room to embrace her. "Our children will grow up together, just like we did, but with fewer secrets," Sarah added softly, "and more love." The sound of horses in the yard drew them to the window. James and Thomas were returning from the north pasture, their easy camaraderie evident in their shared laughter. The ranch hands they'd finally been able to hire rode behind them, a good crew drawn by the Lawrence Ranch's growing reputation for fair dealing and strong leadership. "Remember when we thought we could keep this purely business?" Emma mused, watching Thomas dismount with the fluid grace that still made her catch her breath. Sarah laughed. "We weren't very good at that." "Were we?" "Thank God," James said from the doorway, and Sarah turned to find him watching her with the same tender intensity that never failed to make her heart race. "Though I seem to recall someone being very insistent about keeping things professional. Clearly, I came to my senses." Sarah went to him, fitting herself against his side as naturally as breathing. "The Ranch Association members are coming to discuss the new irrigation project." "Already handled," Thomas announced, joining them with his arm sliding around Emma's waist. The Henderson place agreed to let us run the channels through their South Quarter. With the shared maintenance agreement, everyone benefits. Emma beamed at him. Have I mentioned lately how glad I am we advertised for husbands? Once or twice, Thomas replied, dropping a kiss on her temple. Though I'm still not sure husband was the role you were actually advertising for. Partners, Sarah corrected, feeling James's answering squeeze. In every sense of the word. The sound of approaching wagons signaled the arrival of their neighbors. Through the window, they could see the Hendersons, the Petersons, even old Judge Matthews making his way up the drive. People who had stood with them against Carson, who now worked beside them to build something stronger than any one ranch could achieve alone. We should tell them about the school, Emma said suddenly. With all the new families moving into the valley, we'll need one soon enough. Her hand pressed briefly against her stomach, and Sarah saw Thomas's eyes widen as understanding dawned. Emma? His voice was rough with emotion. Are you saying? Emma's smile was radiant. Hope you're ready to be more than just a rancher. Husband? Thomas whooped with joy, swinging her in a circle that made her laugh. When he set her down, his kiss was tender enough to make Sarah and James look away, giving them privacy. Well, James said quietly, his hand finding Sarah's. Seems the Lawrence Ranch is about to get a bit more lively. Sarah squeezed his fingers. More than you know. She saw the moment her meaning registered, saw joy transform his features. Sarah, you too? Her answer was lost in his kiss, in the warmth of his embrace and the promise of their shared future. Outside, wagon wheels crunched on gravel as their neighbors arrived, bringing plans and hopes for the valley's future. But here in the study, surrounded by the certificates that had made them family, 4 people who had once been strangers shared a moment of pure joy. We should greet our guests, Sarah said finally, reluctantly stepping back from James's arms. The future waits for no one. Thomas agreed, though he kept Emma's hand firmly in his. They moved toward the door together, but Sarah paused for one last look at the marriage certificates. Below them hung the deed to their water rights, and beside that, a simple frame holding their original advertisement from the newspaper. Such a desperate plan it had seemed then, born of necessity and fear. But love, she had learned, could grow in the most unexpected soil. And some crops, once harvested, fed the heart forever. The family portrait hung in the place of honor, above the fireplace, taken 1 year to the day after that desperate advertisement first appeared in Eastern newspapers. Sarah studied it now, one hand resting on her swollen belly as she rocked in. Her father's old chair. The photographer had captured them perfectly. Emma and Thomas, with their 2-month-old daughter Grace, Sarah and James standing close beside them, all of them radiating a happiness that no posed portrait could fake. Wool gathering. Again, Mrs. Miller. James's voice carried from the doorway, warm with love and gentle teasing. Their son kicked beneath her hand, as if recognizing his father's voice. Just thinking about how far we've come, she replied, watching him cross the room to kneel beside her chair. Did you finish the school board meeting? All settled. The new schoolhouse will be ready before winter. His hand joined hers on her belly, just in time for the next generation. Outside, they could hear Emma's laugh mixing with Grace's. Baby giggles as Thomas demonstrated his latest trick with the rope. The sound of ranch hands calling to each other drifted in from the north pasture, where the autumn cattle drive was being organized. Carson's trial ended, James said quietly. Thomas got word in town. 20 years for bank fraud and conspiracy. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. And Harrison? 5 years, with consideration for his testimony. James's eyes held hers. It's really over, Sarah. All of it. She thought of Jenkins's remains, now properly buried in an unmarked grave, with a prayer and a hope for peace. Thought of their father's hidden deed, which had saved not just their ranch but the whole valley. Some secrets, she'd learned, were meant to be revealed. Others could rest quietly, causing no more harm. Did I ever tell you, she said, taking James's hand, that I prayed the night we sent that advertisement? Ask God to send us men strong enough to save the ranch, but not so honorable they'd hate us when they learned the truth. James smiled, pressing a kiss to her fingers. And did he answer your prayer? He sent us men who understood that honor isn't about never making hard choices. It's about making them for the right reasons and living with the consequences. He sent us women who taught us that love isn't about perfection, James countered. It's about seeing someone's scars and battle wounds and loving them more for having survived. The door burst open as Emma backed in, carrying a tea tray, while Grace rode happily on Thomas's shoulders. "Are you two being philosophical again?" Emma teased. "Some of us have been actually working, you know," says the woman who spent an hour watching her husband show off with a rope. Sarah shot back, laughing as Thomas pretended offense. "Important skills to pass down," he declared, swinging Grace into Emma's waiting arms. "This little lady needs to know her heritage." Sarah watched her niece snuggle into Emma's embrace, saw the tender way Thomas touched them both. Such a far cry from the suspicious, careful distance they'd all maintained in those early days. "Heritage," she mused. "Do you think our children will understand? About how their parents met, about why we made the choices we did." "They'll understand love," Emma said firmly. "Love of family, love of the land, love that grows from trust and truth rather than convenience. And they'll understand honor," Thomas added. "The kind that comes from standing together against storms, from choosing what's right over what's easy." James helped Sarah stand, one arm supporting her, as they moved to join their family by the fire. "They'll understand home," he said quietly, "because that's what we've built here, all of us together. Not just a ranch or a marriage or a business partnership. A home." The setting sun painted the room in shades of gold, catching the glass of their family portrait. Sarah looked at their smiling faces, then at the real people gathered around her. Emma, strong and tender, bouncing Grace on her knee. Thomas, watching them with devoted eyes while stoking the fire. James, solid and true, beside her, his hand never leaving hers. "A home," she repeated softly, "built on desperate choices that turned into precious gifts." "Speaking of gifts," Emma said with a knowing smile, "have you decided on names yet?" Sarah met James's eyes, saw his slight nod. "If it's a boy, we're thinking of calling him Lawrence, for Pa." "And if it's a girl?" Thomas asked. "Hope," James answered, his hand tightening on Sarah's, "because that's what brought us all together, hope and trust and love that grew in unexpected soil." Outside, the sun set on their Montana valley, on fields watered by shared streams and protected by shared strength. Inside, 4 people who had once been strangers sat together in the warmth of family, their hearts as full as their home, their love as deep as the roots they'd planted in this precious soil. And somewhere, Sarah thought, her father was smiling, knowing his daughters had found not just husbands, but partners, not just help, but love, not just survival, but triumph. That Lawrence's legacy would live on, in blood and bond and blessed choice, for generations to come.